Shame is something that it's not something that we're born with and automatically we know what's shameful. We're taught shame. And it's not a bad thing. Shame is an emotion as well. And it's also something that helps us really align with our values. However, when it is taught from a lens of more harm than good, right, and learning, it's dangerous. It's not safe. You know, it can definitely lead to a lot of issues later on in life.
Welcome to Empaths Anonymous,
a space for dreamers, healers, and feelers navigating the fine line between putting yourself first and holding space for others.
If you struggle with balancing your needs while still supporting your tribe, then you're in the right place.
Welcome to the support group. Hello and welcome back to the Empaths Anonymous podcast. I'm Christina.
I'm Danie. Leave it in. It's for Cowboy Carter.
What?
How I said that with an accent.
Oh,
I'm Danie.
And I'm Danie. We have a very exciting guest. You guys, I know. I'm very well aware that I say the same thing for every guest, but I am genuinely meaning it. We do have a very exciting guest, Luis Corñejo, who is going to be talking about queer identity, and they are a therapist and a sex therapist. So interesting.
And our first, I do believe, openly queer guest on this podcast.
No, not our first openly queer guest. That was Naomi. But it is our first
You're right.
male guest.
Which is so exciting because we don't just allow any man.
No. You have to be vetted and approved, accepted.
And for Luis, they're someone whose career and trajectory we had been following for some months.
Yeah.
And so we were like, oh my gosh, I feel like they would have just so much to say about queer identity, growing up in the Latinx community, choosing the career path that they did in sex therapy, which is what we're going to talk about and get into a little bit, among so many other things. It was just such a fascinating conversation, and we love that we were able to kind of provide this platform and space for them to just be able to tell their story. We love a story.
We do. We love it. Set me in front of a story time.
It's a story time.
Yes.
It's really good.
Yeah. But before we get into it, what is in your cup?
My cup today was absolutely necessary. I saved $1. I was about to go to the coffee shop and I didn't. I made myself coffee at home because we are finding that Phil's coffee.
Yeah.
K-cups are a lot more accessible in the grocers these days.
Absolutely.
Including Sprouts. Not so much. I can't find the K-cups at Sprouts.
No,
I can
just
find
the beans. When I went to the Encinitas Phil's, you can get the K-cups at the actual Phil's.
And I think you can also order them online.
Oh, so we might just be doing that.
Phil's.com.
Directly from Phil's.
And it's good. It's delicious. It's what I needed. I had a headache and I needed to drink more water. That's in my physical cup. And my cup of life, I'm gonna climb out of my body.
If you could put that into words.
If you're watching, understood. If you're listening, it was just silence. But by the time that you're hearing this, well into halfway through the semester, you guys, it's my official last semester. I'm approved for graduation for my associates. I'm gonna get my associates in May. I'm in the honor society, and so I'm just trying to freaking make it. And it's really hard, but I am loving it along the way. So I'm good. Everything's good. All is well. My health has taken a positive turn.
Good.
We have really fun opportunities and fun things happening for the podcast coming up. But what's in your cup, sister?
So today, because of a man, I was feeling anxious. So before, big boo. I have it's called Moment Botanical Soda. That's the brand. I wish that I could have this moment for life.
For life.
It's lemon turmeric flavor, 0 added sugar. And it has adaptogens, ashwagandha, L-theanine, and turmeric for vitality. So I just needed to pick me up, something to actually not to pick me up. I needed to calm me down.
Slow me down.
Yes. So that's what's in my cup. I just got back from Vegas. We were celebrating my mom's birthday. We played pickleball twice. And so we went to this place called Chicken and Pickle.
Oh.
And when I first visited my brother when he moved back, I drove past it. It's this big warehouse. I'm like, what the fuck is that? I'm like, chicken and pickle. I'm like, what is that? Come to find out, it's a pickleball. It's like if Topgolf was pickleball. Oh. So you go and there's like a shit ton of pickleball courts. There's a bar in the middle. You can order food. They have wings. They have pizza. They have stuff for kids to do. I know, but guess what? Guess who owns it?
Whom?
Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce.
Yucky. I don't want to go there. I've changed mine.
But it is really fun. And it honestly is affordable. Like, none of the food was very expensive. What did I get? I did get a Paloma that was very weak. It just tasted like grapefruit juice. So I skipped. We went 2 days in a row. I skipped the alcohol. No, I got a seltzer the next day. But like I got like 10 wings for like $15. I'm like, okay, I was expecting the prices to be crazy.
Honestly, I was expecting for you to say much worse person. So,
okay.
That's all right. We just don't like the Chiefs.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't care.
We're going to get into the episode, I swear to God.
Yeah.
It's the Phils. It's crack cocaine. There's this couple, and I think they mostly reside in Spain, and they're called Flavor Trip.
Okay.
And they just DJ all over the world.
Ooh, I like that.
Together and cook breakfast.
I know who you're talking about. I've seen their YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
love
like
that.
really jazzy house, funky, groovy. They're so fun. I love to like jam out with them while I'm like reading, like studying.
Yeah.
It's that or it's brown noise.
Okay.
Or my favorite DJ, Mike O'Leary.
The duality.
You guys, I had a discovery of Mike O'Leary and I can't undiscover him. He's a really underground, low key, not quite anymore, but DJ out of New Jersey, and he's on YouTube, and he has like live sets too.
That's her DJ boyfriend.
Also, she came back today from Vegas, so this is coming off of like several days of us not seeing each other.
That is
so
true.
It is kind of like a key moment, but we will not keep you any longer. We do want to get into our conversation with the amazing Luis Corñejo, and we'll see you on the other side. Bye. Bye. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Empaths Anonymous podcast. Today, we have an absolutely adorable and special guest, and that is Luis Corñejo. And he is a queer therapist, model, and consultant based out of LA, dedicated to empowering LGBTQ+ and BIPOC communities. As the founder of PsychoSocial Therapy and Queer Magic Entertainment, he bridges mental health, fashion, and advocacy to dismantle oppressive systems and inspire self-expression. With over a decade of experience, Luis is a passionate speaker and creative whose work highlights representation, inclusivity, and intersectionality. Welcome to the podcast, Luis.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat today and to be a part of this conversation.
We are too. We've been kind of following along in your journey for a little while on social, so it's so nice to finally virtually meet in person. So before we get started into the conversation, as we ask everyone, what is in your cup today? What are you sipping on?
I had a little New Year's party last year, and it was a potluck, so I had a lot of friends come in, and they brought different things. And so someone brought this. I had never had it before. It's Spindrift sparkling water.
Okay.
And it is so good. Oh my gosh, I'm not a big like sparkling water person, but this just tastes so good, and it has like real fruit or real lemon in it. Ooh. So I'm all about it right now. And so yeah, I pretty much kept all the cans they left, and I'm planning on going to purchase some more, but that's what's in my cup right now.
Oh, okay. Yummy. Yeah, anything carbonated over here. We're big beveraginos. I feel like we could probably fill up a whole fridge with beverages. Like, we're those girls.
I'm a huge Diet Coke drinker, so I'm trying to find things that are not Diet Coke. First thing where I'm like, I think I want one of those today is, that actually comes to mind. So I'm enjoying them for sure.
Yeah, for me, that always comes up with like, I crave Coke with food. So it's like if I'm having tacos or I'm having something like I'm like, I need a Coke right now. Yeah. And so we found that Poppy's okay, but Olipop has like the best cherry cola alternative for soda. So it's not so much sugar and all that like caramel additive coloring situation.
I love that. And I'm a big cherry cola fan too. So I'm exactly the same way. Yeah, yes. I grew up with like soda being a thing in my household. My dad's Mexican, my mom's Guatemalan. We grew up on like Coca-Cola, and so for me, like, it took a while to move from that to like Diet Coke, because I think in my head I was like, oh, this has so much sugar, and I'm also diabetic, so it was just kind of like a switch. And then now I struggled so much with finding something that tasted good that I could drink with eating food because I got so used to the soda. So this has been nice to like have like something else that I crave that it doesn't mess with my food so much, like if I drink like something random.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, we love that. We'll send you the link to Olipop. It's so good.
Thank you.
And then how are you showing up today? What's in your cup of life?
Yeah, I am, I'm doing okay. I was trying to do a little bit of a check-in. It's kind of my own personal practice on the daily. It's just how am I feeling? How am I doing? Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes it comes up right away. Sometimes it shows up throughout the day. And I think today I will say it feels like I'm hanging in there. I guess that's probably the best way to describe it. I'm in LA, so as you know, there were the fires that have been ongoing. I mean, just so much, right, that it has kind of felt like a roller coaster. But I definitely think there's a lot that I'm holding in cup-wise in terms of like the stuff that's up in the air that I can't really control, but it's there. And then there's also been so much other stuff that has been really pivotal to, I think, me working through a lot of this and also just holding space for myself. Community, volunteering in LA, that was a big thing. A lot of people coming together in the community, supporting one another. Me as a mental health professional, I volunteered with Latinx therapy and was on site to provide support for people who might need the mental health support, sharing resources, donating, little things that do feel are within my power to be able to do and also help others, right? And to be there in that way. So I think it's been a mixture of just a lot of things, which is life, in general. I mean, we get all the ebbs and flows, right? Everything that comes with it. But it's been nice, I think, for me now, this, at least, I'm going to say maybe the last few years where I've learned to see things in a much broader form than just everything's bad, everything's good. It's like, no, you know what? There's actually lots of glimmers, and yeah, there's lots of stuff that's not great, but I have a lot of both, and it's okay. It's part of life, and so finding the things that do bring me joy and nurture my soul is what I focus on now, and everything else, I take it day by day. And I do other things, community work, right, or speaking and educating, my therapy practice where I work with clients directly who are impacted by these things, just as I am, because I'm also part of the communities that I serve. So, it's a day by day. It's definitely been a very interesting time, I'll say.
Yeah.
to put it lightly.
To put it lightly, thank you.
Yeah. It's hard to zoom out sometimes and look at the bigger picture of everything because it's like we're inundated with information of things happening globally on a nationwide scale. And so I love what you said about the glimmers because they are small things, but they are the things that matter and they're the things that kind of carry us through every day. Right. So we have to look at those or we will suffer.
Right. Yeah. I was telling her earlier that like, I'm in the process of learning to hold space for two opposing feelings because they can both be true at the same time. I'm really grateful for a lot of things that are happening in my life right now, opportunities, people coming into my life, but I also just like feel this collective sadness and that's okay. Like you said, it doesn't have to be all good or all bad. Like there's sometimes this thing in the middle. Or you can feel like multiple things at once. And it's like you just have to kind of learn how to hold them both.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that because that is definitely a challenge and it's something that you practice. And I like to call it the advanced, therapy work because it comes after moving through survival, right? That initial stage of us taking care of ourselves and just making sure that there's a sense of safety and stability, and then moving on into like a different perspective, right? And shifting the way that we perceive things, which is, one of those is being able to hold space for complexities like multiple things being true at once or existing at once. And that is hard. So I applaud you, and I think that's wonderful that that's something that that has been coming up for you, and definitely for me. I like to practice it because it's hard to do. Sometimes it's so hard to like see the big picture because you're so you're being bombarded with one thing that it's okay as well, right? If you're going through that process, I mean, all of it's okay. It really is more of how do we find things that do help and do work, and also can help us find that ability to not just cope but also thrive, right? And one of those is being able to see the glimmers, like, okay, you know what, actually I still have people that love me that are there for me, or I still, live in a place where it does feel remotely safe and it's, it's a blessing, or also there's people that are working hard that I can support as well, who are making these changes and movement, and that gives us hope, and it allows us to know that, just because we're getting one narrative doesn't mean that's the only thing that's out there.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I am very grateful that we have the privilege of living in California, because it's not, it's an expensive state. It's not easy all the time to live here. And you're experiencing everything with the fires and housing crisis and everything like that. But at the end of the day, I'm really grateful that I just live somewhere, kind of like what you said, it's remotely safe. I do have an overall feeling of safety here. I'm not in danger. So really grateful for that. But we did want to just get a little bit more background on Luis. We would love to know, what's your journey been becoming a therapist, and why you decided to go into this work?
Yeah, being a therapist was never, I guess, on the bingo card of life per se. It was never like, this is what I want to do. There were elements of it that definitely have always been a part of who I am and what I believe in. And that has been to help others and support people. And, that came from my upbringing. My parents are both very religious. They're still very religious now. Obviously, it has its, pros and cons and good things and not so great things. But one of the things that was really wonderful from it that they taught me was to help others, that we, show our faith and our love through service of other people. And that was a big thing in my life and my family growing up, where my parents were always hosting folks who had come from other countries and providing for them and letting them stay at our place without paying, whether it was us volunteering or donating or even giving up our own things to help others. There was one time where I remember coming home from school and my brother and I walked into our rooms and our beds were gone. And I was like, is my bed? And I remember going to my mom and she said, oh, we had a family. They just came. They didn't have anywhere to sleep. So we gave it to them. And I was like, oh, what about us? And
but you're like, my bed though.
Yeah. I was like, where's my bed? And my mom was like, it's okay. We're all going to sleep in the living room and the floor. And we did. And, I think at that point, to me, it didn't make sense, but I also didn't hate it. I think it was just more of a norm to do that. And they would remind me, other people are not as fortunate, or other people are more in need, and we'll get another bed. And we would always, get a bed maybe a couple of weeks later, whatever. And we kind of made it a sleepover thing where we're on the living room watching TV, and we all got to stay on the floor. And, so now when I look back at it, I get reminded of how important that was to them, for us to understand that there was a lot that we had to have gratitude for, and also support others. And it became, I think, a big part of who I turned out to be later on as an adult. And even as a child, there were other moments where it also got me in trouble. There was a moment where my mom would always say the same, tell you that we had to share and help others. And I remember she had gone grocery shopping and brought all of these things to the house, and she had left them there. And she's like, I'm going to go move the car. Well, I had all these kids from the neighborhood who saw the bags, and they're like, oh my gosh, you got this, you got that. I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, take it. And they took all our groceries. And my mom comes back and she's like, where are the groceries? I'm like, oh, some of the kids, they wanted it, so I gave it to them.
Mom, you told me. You told me to share, Mom.
Exactly. She gave me this look of like, oh my God, like, what are we going to eat? And she had me go collect it from the family. So she went with me, and it was funny because she would explain to the people, and like, it was kind of one of those like lessons. Yeah. And some of it, she did let the kids grab some of the stuff, but we took the rest back with us. So it was kind of like we still shared. Right. So, it was stuff like that I think about. And so, all of that, I think really formed this desire to want to help others. And so initially I wanted to be a doctor. And that was something I got very obsessed with in middle school. I was a very interesting kid when I think back. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was very social, but also very shy, and I was bullied a lot because of my more feminine mannerisms. And so people would often make fun of me or call me, say that I was a girl or didn't want to play with me, things like that. And so for a long time, it was a very difficult, I think, time for me, really, like, socially. But at the same time, I still really craved that desire to connect with others. And so throughout that time, I remember putting a lot of emphasis into school because I didn't really have a lot of friends. And so I was a big reader. I was someone that was always doing well academically. I remember for my birthday, I think it was about like 7th grade, maybe going on to 8th grade, I asked my dad for a medical encyclopedia. He went out and bought me one. And I
love that so much.
Yeah. And, I couldn't even understand it, but I loved looking at the pictures. I loved reading it, even though I didn't get it. But it was just so much fun for me. And I had it was a huge book. He literally asked me what I wanted. And he was, do you want this remote control car? Do you want this? And I was like, no, I want a medical book. And he looked at me like, are you sure? And my mom was like, I don't think you're going to use it. And my dad was like, no, if that's what he wants, we'll get him that. And so he did get it for me. And I remember sitting there reading through it, looking at all the pictures of anatomy and just being so fascinated by it. And that was the goal. I think 7th grade was when I was like, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to go to UCLA. This is what I'm going to do. And, being the first in my family to even think about higher education or even think about a career was very lonely because I didn't have a lot of guidance. And so most of it I had to learn from either school or really from other folks, right, that had done it, whether it was my teachers or counselors. And a big transition for me was high school. So I was born and raised in Inglewood, which is a town near LAX that's pretty famous in rap songs. A lot of people know about Inglewood.
Yeah. I used to live in Westchester. Neighbors.
Yeah, right by there. Yeah, right by there, really close by all the airport, areas.
Yes.
But I went to school there. It was predominantly Black and brown, and there wasn't a lot of. And I hate saying this when I look back because I felt like there was definitely not a lot of hope put into us in a lot of situations in terms of going to college or even thriving in that sense, because there was just not. I remember there were very few teachers that were supportive, that did push me or did tell me, you should go to college, you should do this. I had a lot of teachers who were very disconnected. I know they were overworked. Now when I look back, I think of the situation and I'm like, wow, that was pretty intense, growing up in the hood and having to deal with gangs and violence and all this other stuff that didn't really allow for us to even focus on education. So when my dad got a new job, he actually started working in a city called El Segundo, which is right next to Manhattan Beach, and it's a predominantly white, upper middle class city. I remember going with him to his job because he would take me with him. He would, he had to part-time babysit. That was the only way that they could survive. And my parents were and they are still extremely hard workers. And so they, they had to figure out how to care for us. So I would go with my dad after school, do homework while he was working at his job, and we would drive by the school. And I remember telling him one day, I really want to go to that school. And he was against it in the sense that he knew it was a really great school, but he would tell me, there's a lot of racist people and I don't want to expose you to that. I don't want you to be treated differently. And I think at that point he didn't really know about how I was bullied because I never really mentioned it to them, mostly because I was scared, of telling them like, oh, well, I'm already being bullied, because people make fun of me, call me, gay, or say that I'm a girl, or call me Juan Gabriel, which is, I don't know if y'all know who Juan Gabriel is, but a famous Mexican singer who people assume was queer, a lot of that, right? And so I never shared that with them, and I don't think they knew a lot about my childhood or even my time in middle school. I remained fairly quiet because I was often very scared of them knowing because of their religion, because even though there was so much good in it, we were also taught that a lot of things were not okay, and that was one of them. So for me, really understanding myself, it was very complex. So I didn't tell him that, but I was like, no, Dad, I really want to go to the school. And I eventually convinced him, and because he worked in the district, he was able to help me basically get into the school. And I say get in because in LA, if you don't live in a certain area, you're not allowed to go to the schools. You have to get a special permit. And so because I had really good grades and I was one of the students that just had very high like reading scores and lots of things like that, they accepted me into the school. And so I ended up going there, and I was one of the only Latino kids there. I think they had about 8% Latino kids, and then it was like 85 or something percent Caucasian, and then very small amount of Black students and a little bit more Asian students. But it was a very big transition for me, where I was introduced to a lot of things that I had not been before in Inglewood. And the funny thing is that I actually felt more accepted there than I did when I was in Inglewood and in the schools there. I didn't get bullied. I remember being someone that was very advanced in English. And so that was the one thing that I recall going into like honors programs and like moving up in school. And people seemed to be a lot more receptive. I remember that was the first place I ever saw someone that was openly gay and queer and just, you know, being themselves. And yeah, there were comments and things like that, but it was never like a harsh bullying, you know. It was just more of like people said things under their breath or whatever, but they kept it to themselves. And this person, at least from my experience, I obviously don't know, you know, I never spoke with them. I think at that point I was also still trying to keep myself safe, and so I wouldn't share about anything that had to do with my sexuality or my feelings or thoughts or anything like that. But I remember seeing them just do the talent shows as Madonna, like performing, and me being like, oh my gosh, I love Madonna, you know, but not also not being open. And so, you know, lots of things like that. But after, I think, being at that school, that's when the possibility of me going on to higher education became more real, because everyone talked about it. It was the norm. It was like, where are you going to go to college? Where are you going to apply? Have you done the SATs, the pre-SATs, blah, blah, blah. All of these things that I didn't know about, you know, going into the school. And so I think in a way it was a good transition, because it definitely pushed me in the direction that I knew I wanted to go and needed to go. And it didn't feel alien or alone because there were so many people that were just, that was already the thing. So, you know, I went to high school, graduated, went up north to Cal State East Bay. I didn't get into UCLA, and I was really bummed about it. And I thought, well, what can I do? Should I go to community college? Should I blah, blah, blah? And I think at that moment I decided that I needed to move away, mostly because I was still trying to figure myself out. And with my parents, it was just very difficult to really navigate and to be myself. And I thought, you know, this is an opportunity. I can go to college and go somewhere far away rather than go to the community college here. And my parents were not happy about it. They were definitely very upset. They wanted me to go to college, but they also felt like it wasn't the norm for their kids to go away. Like you don't leave your family. That's selfish. You know, that's not something that we do. They felt abandoned. And especially my mom, who, you know, left her family when she was, I think, about 14, 15 years old to come to the US, and left with her older sister. And, you know, they were working in factories and, you know, not seeing their families for many, many years. You know, she didn't see a lot of my aunts for a really long time. You know, I think the first time she saw them was when I was already in middle school, and that had been years. She had been maybe like 15 years or more, actually, that I can think of. And, you know, for her, it felt like an abandonment. It was definitely a really big moment in my family where, you know, here I am saying I'm leaving, you know, I'm heading to college. She didn't talk to me for 6 months, didn't reach out, didn't send me anything. She told me, if this is what you want, you decided to leave your family, then go. And, you know, my dad, he's always been, I think, the opposite. He's very interesting, because I always thought, you know, he's Mexican, he's a little more machista, more like this, but he wasn't actually. He was more emotional. I remember seeing him cry. I remember him being a lot more open with me about things, and he was like, go. He's like, it's your life, like, do what you need to. I'll take care of your mom. And I remember just like that moment, they all actually, and the funny thing was that they were still so like supportive, in the sense that my mom and aunts all got in a van and drove up 6 hours to drop me off in San Francisco, helped me set up everything, even while my mom was like, you know, not making eye contact and just being very hurt. But they still went. Yeah,
it was like mad support.
It was like mad support. And you know, I think now I see it as a hurt, right? She was hurt. She felt like, you know, she didn't have that choice, right, of leaving because she wanted to. She had to leave her family. So I think for her, it was this confusion of why I was leaving. And obviously I couldn't share a lot of things with her at that point either, which made it very difficult. But I ended up going to college, made a lot of mistakes, decided that I didn't want to be a doctor because I hated mathematics and science. And I was like, okay, this was not the business, not what I love, wasn't doing too hot. And came back to LA, went back up north. I was figuring things out. And I think it took me 6 years to finish my undergrad, which back then felt so shameful to me, because being someone that just did so well in school, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be out of here in 4, blah blah blah. And it took me 6 years, and now when I look back, I'm so grateful, because I was able to really figure out who I was as a person, and also it moved me into the direction that I'm in now, which was pivotal, right? Because I think in that moment it was like, well, you know, this didn't work out, what should I do now? Like, who am I really? What is it that I want in my life? And I kept coming back to the wanting to help people. And I think when I wanted to be a doctor, that was the main thing, was like, well, you know, the big thing, right, that especially in the Latino community, when you think of people helping, is a doctor. You know, you want to be a doctor, right. You want to do this and make a lot of money. And I thought, you know, outside of that, it wasn't maybe the way that I wanted to help people. And I thought about it more and more. And I remember a friend of mine who was also in my bio class, and she was like coming into, I'm going to be a doctor, and it just didn't work out for either one of us. And she came up to me one day and she's like, you know, I decided I'm just going to go check out the other programs and departments to see if there's anything I like. I'm going to go to the child development. And I thought, oh, I'm like, that's interesting. She's like, you should come with me. And I thought in my head, like, child development, like, it's not, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't even know that it was like an actual focus. And I thought, you know what, let's go. I'll go with you. And we went to one of the meetings, and they were talking about child development, but from a very psychology-oriented lens. And I fell in love. I fell in love learning about our development, how we are introduced to our environment, nature versus nurture, education, the impact of politics. It just felt like such a mesh of all the things that were not just connected to me as a person, especially because I was impacted by all of these things, as are all of us, but it was just something that really drew me in. And I think it was the first time where I found something that I was just like, okay, this is interesting. I like this. So I switched over, straight A's, finished my program, you know, went into teaching. And I was working at a child development center for a while, and I thought, I love this, but I started realizing that my favorite part of it was working with the parents. I would meet with them and talk to them about development and listen to their worries and support them. And I was like, this is kind of more like therapy in a way. And in my head, that was the idea. I was like, I could totally sit there and listen to people and have empathy and just, you know, I love this. And at that point, I had never been to therapy. I didn't know what a therapist did. I didn't know any of it. I think in my head, it was just what I saw on TV. And I thought, I could do this. I love this. And, you know, after being there for a few years, I started to look into master's programs. And I met my best friend at the center, and she was studying social work, and she's like, you should look into it, you should do social work. And I was like, oh, I'm like, you know what, I never thought about it. I'm like, let me look into it. And I'm someone who, when they get like a feeling or a gut thing, like, I'm like, let me look into this. So I started doing my research and found out there were social workers and licensed marriage and family therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists. And I was like, okay, this is really close to what I have been sensing I would like to do. So I started to do my research, and I remember being in San Francisco at that point. I was at the school I had been working at for maybe like 3 going on 4 years, and I saw 2 programs that I just absolutely loved, and one was at USC and the other one was at Cal State Long Beach. So I applied to the one at Cal State Long Beach because the USC one was extremely expensive, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I want to go into this route, you know. And it was really hard because and it was really hard because it was another barrier, right? I think even for just thinking about education, like, you know, being the first one to graduate from a 4-year university, and then 6 years for me, but graduating and then going on to a master's program was like, no, like, we just didn't do that. No one had any background in it. My family was super supportive, but they also couldn't really help me, you know, aside from encouraging me and telling me to go for it. So I remember telling my partner, who I had met over there, we started dating in 2009, and I applied to grad school in 2012. We had been living together at that point, and I had said to him, I was like, you know, I want to go back to school. I think I want to be a therapist. But, you know, there's a lot of programs, and the only one that I really like is Cal State Long Beach. And I said to him, I'm going to apply. If I get in, that's a sign. And if I don't, then I'll just drop it and I'll figure out something else. So he's like, yeah, do it. You should just apply. And I did. And, you know, it kind of left my mind. And I thought, you know, I didn't think about it. And then I get a call. And they're like, we want to interview you. So we'd like for you to come to the campus and talk to one of the professors, yada, yada, you know, for the program. So I got really excited. And I remember telling my parents, and my parents actually went with me to the interview. So I was, I was sitting in this little office space with all of these folks who were dressed up in their suits, really nice, with their briefcases, you know, ready for the grad school interview. And I was the only one sitting there with my parents, dressed up like they were going to church, because that was their Sunday best. sitting like I'm sitting in the middle, and they're like, okay, we'll be waiting here for you, you know. And like I went in there, did the interview, and we left, and I flew back to San Francisco. And I remember thinking, like, you know what, like, I don't think I did too hot. It's fine. I'm gonna go back home. I got home, I think a few weeks later. My parents came up to visit, and they wanted to go eat, so we went out to a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown. And I was sitting there when I got a call, and it was a random number. And so I don't know, I got up and I was like, you know what, let me just answer. And so I answered the phone, and it was the director of the program. And she's like, hi, Louise, this is so-and-so, you know, director of the program here at Cal State Long Beach. Do you have a minute? And I'm like, of course. And she's like, well, I just want to say congratulations personally, because we're accepting you into the program. And I remember just starting to cry and thinking, oh my gosh. She's like, you know, we had about 500 applications. We only took 30 people, and you're one of them. And I just like, you know, that moment of like, okay, this is meant to be. And I remember hanging up the phone, like, my mom was like, what happened? She didn't, you know, she was confused. And I told her I got into the program, and, you know, they got so excited, gave me a big hug. We finished eating. My partner was like, I guess we're moving to LA. And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And we packed up our stuff, and I moved in, finished my program. You know, mostly A's, got a stipend from the state to do work for about a year in a nonprofit. And cool. Yeah, and it was so fast, you know. And I think for me, what was really symbolic was that I loved it. I loved the moment that I was in grad school. I loved learning about helping others. And I think the biggest thing that I definitely got from grad school was that I was actually required to do my own therapy. And I had never gone to therapy. I think in my head at that point, I was thinking that I was going to be this like person, you know, sitting with like a suit and tie, listening to others, giving them all this advice and wisdom. And that was not the case, you know, going into grad school and them telling me, you got to go to therapy too.
There's something wrong with me.
I'm the therapist. It's me.
And you know what? And they were like, well, we require everyone. And honestly, they even said to us, like, once you finish, you're probably going to be in therapy for the rest of your career. And I was like, you know, it was kind of like weird. But I remember finding a therapist that was also Central American like me, and going to her office. And I remember my first experience just feeling so guarded. Like, I was almost like, what are you talking about? You know, sharing the surface level stuff. And it wasn't until maybe 2 months into the therapy where she looked at me and she said, you know, Louise, like, I get this sense that you bring up all this surface stuff because you're protecting yourself from something. I don't know if you ever had a safe space before. And I remember like crying, like being like, oh my God, and just pouring my heart out. And that was the first moment where I fell in love with the work even more, like understood it from a different perspective. And I've been in therapy now since that first session.
What they said was correct.
Yeah. they were right.
Exactly. You know, and I've had different therapists, all who helped me with different eras of my, you know, of my becoming and who I am, and for different reasons. And even the last therapist I worked with, they were the first queer, open, very similar to who I am. And it was such a healing experience to find someone else that I could see, and it almost felt like a reflection. But I was so appreciative of all my experiences with different forms, you know, different people, different titles, backgrounds, and they all helped me in one way or another. And so I'm a huge fan of therapy. I have definitely found it to be a space that not only did I not have growing up, that I think would have been extremely beneficial, but also the work that I've done in not practicing therapy from the traditional medical Western perspective, but really indigenizing because of my roots, and fighting a lot of the oppressive narratives and systems that take place even in the mental health field. And so for me, it's all been a journey. And I think it was never something that I said, this is what I'm going to do. It just happened. And, you know, the last year I started modeling, working in fashion as well. That's why I moved to LA again. I actually went back to the Bay Area after my year here. Yeah, I did my 1 year.
You've been up and down and up and down.
I know.
I've been up and down. I love California. And you know what? It's always been such a heartache to be between San Francisco and LA, because I love both places so much. But I left after my year here, after I did my nonprofit work. I was like, let's go back up north. I was up there for about maybe 4 or 5 more years through the pandemic, the 2021. And then I started to shift into doing fashion and modeling and a lot more work that was an extension of my therapy work and really centering around self-expression, centering around dismantling rigid beauty standards. And I had gone into private practice at that point, and so it just became a lot easier for me to really make this connection that I decided, you know what, I keep going back to LA, I keep showing up there because that's where all the creatives are, that's where all the designers are, that's where all the therapists, also a lot of the Latinx therapists were in LA. Yeah. And so I found myself been
finding that too.
It's so intense. And in San Francisco, I always appreciate that it was a place where I felt so free. It was just such a different energy, a different place, that when I got there in 2004, I just remember being exposed to such a very different way of seeing the world, and everything felt like liberation to me. And I remember that was the drawing for me with San Francisco. And so I always appreciate that. But I did notice later on that a big cultural shift happened. A lot of tech folks moved in. There was definitely a lot of folks of color that left, and a lot of changes. And so I was pulled back, almost back home. And it was such a weird experience to come back, because I knew LA. I was born and raised here, but I hadn't spent enough time here to feel like this was home, or like I knew LA. And so the last 2 years and a half has been almost like this rediscovering so much, especially in downtown. Downtown was not a place that we would come to often, except for like the callejones where we go shopping, or like a restaurant. But now it's like the place to be. It's so alive, and the energy is so wild here. It's just like such a creative place. And I knew, I think in that moment, that I had to come down here to really follow that other part of myself. And so I'm someone that I don't sit in rigid kind of like, this is what I am, this is what I do. I'm very much about, where does my heart lead me? I'm a dreamer. I'm someone that likes to express themselves. That's always been who I was, and it was really stunted for a long time, that now I just go with it. And so when I felt that, I moved to LA last year. I got paid for modeling. I walked in shows. I did a lot of campaigns. I started styling. I started doing a lot of work with other designers and photographers, while still maintaining my private practice and doing therapy, and then still connecting those two by doing speaking engagements and consultation, and showing up to networking events to represent and just dismantle even fashion for queer people. Wore my dresses that I got custom made for me specifically, wore my outfits that I dreamed up, and had amazing designers that I have now become really close friends. And so all of it they have been things that I didn't expect or dream of, but I knew they were there. And so for me, that has, it's been a wild year. So, you asking me that, it's almost like, wow, like this is, I went like this to get here.
As you're telling the story, it's like, you're like almost connecting the dots in your own head. You're like, oh, wow, like I have like done a lot of things. Yeah. And it sounds like it's allowed you to really explore the thing that you love, which is helping people, but also like this creative side.
Yeah, you touch on so many points that we were gonna ask, which we still can get into like more details.
But we can kind of shift gears, because let's talk about sex.
Let's talk about sex. Yeah, I was gonna. Speaking of firsts, I did want to briefly mention earlier on in the podcast, we did a 2-part series on like multi-potentiality and this idea of being a multi-potentialite. I'm like, Luis is a multi-potentialite and someone who's putting all those things to action. And so we love to see like that happening in real time, and someone being a true example of listening to that and just saying yes to it. And doing it scared and saying, okay, well, I mean, I didn't think I would like this, but I do. And so I'm going to do it. But yeah, speaking to sex and speaking of firsts, being the first in your family to do so many things for the first time, and speaking out for yourself at such a young age, saying, you know what, this school is cool, but this school is where I belong. And because I know it's going to take me to different heights, right? So acknowledging that about yourself, where within that journey that we just went on with you, did you decide like, okay, there's a specialty here that I kind of want to dive into?
Yeah, sex therapy was also another thing that just kind of came about. It was during the pandemic, and the reason why I decided, there were a couple reasons. The main reason why I decided to pursue a sex therapy certification, which for folks who may not be familiar with it, it's an actual additional focus. So after you get your master's, after you get your license, and you can do it actually before, but you can't practice it in the sense until you have your license. And so it's a grueling process. You know, you go to your undergrad for 4 years, you go to grad school for about 2.5 years, you collect your hours because you can't just be a therapist. It's about 2.5 years. To some people it takes them longer than that to get their hours, and then you get licensed, so you pass an exam, and you have to do so much just to get licensed and to be a therapist. So you know, once you do that, I think it maybe was about almost 10 years for me to just be a therapist, starting from undergrad. Well, since I did 6, maybe about like 11 years total. And after I finish, you know, you get trained in like the general sense of therapy, psychology, mental health, you know, lots of great things, but there's a lot that they don't really teach you. You get kind of like a taste for something. So for example, like any type of specialization, whether it's brain spotting, EMDR, sometimes they'll offer you a course or an introduction to theories, but you don't really get trained in these modalities. And so sex therapy was one of the courses that they taught us in my program. It was a course on sexuality, human sexuality. And I loved it. I loved everything we talked about. I love the liberation aspect of it. I love the perspective, a shift on intimacy, moving away from just sex, but really about connection. And so that was my first taste in school. And then after I finished, you know, practiced, did all this stuff. And then I think during the pandemic, I realized that me moving into my private practice and wanting to specialize specifically in queer mental health, that sex was such a huge part of that work. And I'm not talking about just like the physical act. I'm talking about sex in terms of our bodies, self-expression, political. I mean, so much that went into it that I thought, you know, this is what I want to do. And, you know, as with anything where there's gatekeeping, there's obviously like additional things you have to do, money you have to invest, time you have to put in. And so my sex therapy certification also took time. I had to not just find a program that was about like, I think $8,000 that was extremely expensive, but I was fortunate enough to apply for a scholarship, and I got a scholarship, full paid for everything. And I was really grateful for that. Yeah, you know, so I always tell people, go for it, apply for it, tell your story, because you know, there are opportunities out there. I thought, I can't do this, I can't pay for this, you know, it's too much. At that point, you know, I was still just launching my practice, and I got the scholarship, went through the program. You know, it was about 6 months of school, and then still another like 6 months that they give you to finish all the coursework, which is a lot of writing and reading and research. Finish that, and then you still have to collect hours with clients specifically in sex therapy cases. So it's a hurdle. I mean, you have to go through this whole process, and on top of that, you have to, you know, submit that, and you pay for a supervisor for sessions, right? So they can consult, you can consult with, and they can sign off on your hours. It was the whole thing. I got that done and submitted it, and I got my certification maybe 2 years ago, I believe. It's through ASEC. So they're one of the big sex therapy governing boards. And, you know, I finished, and like many things in education, especially for me, it lacked the queer perspective. There was a tint of it, but a lot of it was still very much rooted in old research, heterosexual research around, like, you know, Johnson & Johnson's studies around like sex and male, female, and like a lot of these things that were very much, the language was still a little outdated. And so I had to do a lot of my own. I mean, a lot of it I feel like I started to know because of my identity, and because of, you know, the reading, and also the people that I hung out with, where there was already an awareness of sex being way more than what I was taught, but it was, you know, it was a formalized version of sex therapy. So through that, and there were also a few professors that were actually queer that were amazing, and, you know, really pushed us into directions of understanding sex work, of understanding body autonomy, of understanding gender affirming care. And so all of that accumulated, you know, and also me challenging even my supervisor, because she was very like set in her ways. She was an older white woman. There were not a lot of supervisors that were folks of color or queer, so it wasn't much of a choice. And I remember even that, like, challenging some of the narratives and outdated stuff. And so, you know, we would headbutt, and I do appreciate her. I feel like I did learn from her. And at the same time, there was also that obstacle of having to challenge, like, no, actually it's not the same. I remember hearing that, oh, it's the same for everyone. I'm like, no, actually it's not. That's not how queer people see sex. And, well, what do you mean? How do they see it? And so moments of me educating where I was supposed to be getting that, there were, you know, and I think it happens for so many of us who are, you know, going through academia, or even folks of color, and challenging some of these very oppressive perspectives, right? But I got through it. I got through it. I did my own work as well. I had a lot that was coming just internally from my experience and, trainings. Like I have another training actually next weekend on queer tantra and more like physical connection. And so that's how I stay up to date with the queer. I mean, I got the education for sure. I definitely got a lot in terms of assessing, in terms of the medical stuff, in terms of the perceiving cases, which was always extremely helpful because you need to understand what's happening before you can actually offer support. So I did all of that, and sex therapy became a very big part of my work because, like I said, it wasn't centered on the actual just act of sex. So I don't really work with folks when it comes to specifically like erectile dysfunction or anything like that, where people come in, and I mean I do in a sense, but not in the same sense of like a jack of all trades. I work with everyone. People know, and I think that's what I've appreciated about my private practice and me really setting off on my own, that people know who I am, what I believe in, what I work with, who I work with before they even like reach out and schedule an appointment. It's not like when you work for an agency and you don't really get a choice. You kind of just get people sent to you. If you're lucky, they will ask what your preference is or take that into account, and then they'll send you people that are more relevant in terms of like the support you can give. But when you're in private practice, it's not like that. You get to decide. You get to really market yourself and also say no if you don't think that you're a good fit or that you can support someone. So that has been a blessing for me in a sense that like I'm very vocal about my perspectives of mental health and how it transcends, especially the whole diagnosis and this is what's wrong with you. No, for me, it's really about what is your experience? Who are you? What are the intersectional aspects, right, of your identity, and how have they impacted you? Because they do matter. And so that has been the biggest benefit from sex therapy, that it has allowed me to incorporate way more than just talking about depression, anxiety. It's allowed me to really move into a deeper aspect, right, of who a person is based on their upbringing, their beliefs. And all of that blended in with my child development education that I got has really allowed me to be able to provide a very broad and full, I like to call it a very full encompassed approach to therapy, where I'm not just seeing someone in the present, I'm seeing them as a person who has experienced many things, who is experiencing things currently. And so I support my clients where they're at. I don't tell them where they need to go. I ask them, like, where are you at? This is what I believe. What are your thoughts about this? I'm very much about collaboration and supporting clients in their journey and acknowledging that we do all types of things. We're messy. We do all types of things to survive, to get through things, to just make things be okay. And it's okay. It's required of us. Systems are not always understanding of that or supportive, and we have to figure out ways to do things. And so I really try to see my clients as people and humans. And so I have a lot of things that I do where I don't generally, I think I would say, align with a lot of people or colleagues or therapists that I know in that sense. And yet there's a lot that do. And that's why I love LA, because like I was saying, a lot of the Latinx therapists that are here are pioneers. They and other therapists of color, a lot of Black therapists, a lot of interracial therapists, a lot of therapists who are queer, trans therapists who are breaking down these things and saying, no, this is not what works for us. We're not one size fits all, and really shifting that form of providing mental health, quality mental health. And so for me, I like to consider myself, one of my colleagues that's in that journey as well. And so it's been nice to really be able to do that. And so my work is very much centered around that belief that we are human first, that we have lots of experiences that impact us, and that no, just because you have anxiety or depression doesn't mean that there's a recipe for you to fix yourself, right, or recover. It's more of like understanding it and allowing that to be also part of who your journey and who you are, and how do you learn about it, right, and find things that do work for you. And they may not work all the time, but there are going to be many instances where you find other paths to healing. I'm also a firm believer that therapy is just one avenue. There are lots of cultural practices. There are lots of community practices. There are lots of even forms of self-expression that help us with our mental health. And all of them are not one answer. They're a combination of things that we need as humans to help us. So, sex therapy became a big part of that. And that's kind of how it happened. And, now I love working with brands who are really aiming to dismantle a lot of these kinds of like old school forms of thinking. So I work with lots of folks of color who are starting these brands and talking about sex. Because I think even in our culture is right. It's very taboo.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And I know that's one of the things that we did want to explore is this. I mean, you said that you grew up religious, and that's something that I experienced as well. And then add on that the cultural, expectations and norms and everything. When I started going to therapy, my therapist told me one of the biggest themes is when people come to her, they come to me for 3 things. And one of the biggest things is religious trauma and shame. So how does shame, I mean, I guess you can't really answer like how does one remove it, because that can look so different for everyone. But like, how does shame keep us from showing up in our sexuality and being our full selves?
I love that you said that, because yes, that is one of the biggest ones, and we don't actually. A lot of people actually don't know that they don't see the outcomes of their experiences with religion as trauma because it's normalized. Right. And so it's seen more as a belief system, but it is traumatizing. It is definitely traumatizing when you grow up being told that your body's dirty, that, you have to be pure, that masturbation is a bad thing, right? That God's watching you. When you hear things about like sex before marriage, when you hear things about lingerie being sexy and that being promiscuity, when you hear about rape culture, I mean, all of these things get ingrained into us so early on that's how shame is constructed. Shame is something that it's not something that we're born with and automatically we know what's shameful. We're taught shame. And it's not a bad thing. Shame is an emotion as well, and it's also something that helps us really align with our values. However, when it is taught from a lens of more harm than good, right, and learning, it's dangerous. It's not safe. It can definitely lead to a lot of issues later on in life, whether it is issues with intimacy, whether it is, addiction to things like pornography, whether it is dependency on sex. I mean, lots of things that come out of it. And I've worked with a variety of clients, and definitely, whether we call it outright religious trauma, there's usually a very big part of their story that involves these narratives and purist culture and Marianismo, or the opposite of machismo, right, for a lot of women, which also, I mean, it affects women in across cultures, but it's really the idea that women are supposed to represent this essence of pureness and self-sacrifice and emotional fluidity, right, around how they just handle the world. It's exhausting, it's unrealistic, and at the same time it's the gold standard, right, for society. That's what men want, that's what society wants, that's what other women shame other women for, because when you don't meet that. And so that's how powerful it is. That's how it impacts us. That shame is that deep rooted that even when we don't believe it, even when we don't understand it, we just regurgitate because it's what we were told, rather than actually being curious about it or even questioning, is this something that I believe is shameful, or is it something that I was told is shameful? And so when I see clients, that come to see me, a big part of it is like, well, I was told sex is dirty. I was told that you shouldn't enjoy sex. I was told that sex is for reproduction. I was told that, sex is only for men to enjoy, blah, blah, blah. Lots of different stories, lots of different narratives, lots of different beliefs that I often have to really be very gentle and also very careful to help clients dismantle it themselves. I don't say outright to them, well, that's BS. Well, that, because I understand, as someone that experienced a lot of religious trauma as well, that it's deep rooted and it's painful and very vulnerable to have to come to a place where we're unlearning and giving ourselves the grace to be human and understand that pleasure is not a bad thing, that intimacy is not just about sex, that our bodies are not things that are, expected to look and be and treated a certain way, that it's not dirty. And so even that, I mean, and it honestly, it doesn't surprise me, because being someone that was also in that environment and those kinds of beliefs, I remember growing up and no one talked about sex. If we saw sex in a movie or anything that was sexually like charged, we're just kind of like, don't look at it, close your eyes. And it was like, like shameful, and like we never asked questions. Right. We, the whole thing was, when you get married, you'll find out. It's like,
yeah. Well, you're like, Mom, too late for that, because now I got this person I'm stuck with forever and I don't like what they're doing.
Yeah.
Exactly. You don't get prepared for a huge part of what it means to be human, because we're all in relationships. We're all, going through life, connecting with others. And it's not just like I said about sex, it's also intimacy. It affects even our connections with other people. I've had men tell me like, oh, you can't have intimacy with other men, when they're straight. And I go, yeah, you can. You can have connections with other men where it's platonic and you're friends and you care about them and you can hug. And they're like, oh, that sounds gay. And it's like, yeah, of course it does. That's what you were taught. That this is, and yet when we sit here and we're like, oh, I wonder why men don't, they're so like violent or aggressive, or they're so, blah, blah, blah. And my favorite thing that I love sometimes saying to my clients is, it's so interesting how we often say that women are so weak emotionally. They're so emotional. And yet men are the ones that have the thinnest ability to really like cope with their emotions. They get angry. They get, because they're not taught to like really listen to their feelings, and they're alienated. And this is not their fault either. This is literally society and religion and culture that teaches men that they have to be detached, and they have to. There's only one acceptable feeling, and that's anger. Men can get angry, and that's totally cool, right? Because you can be pissed, you can, blah blah blah.
Because that's macho.
That's masculine. It's macho. It's masculine. Alpha male.
You can't be sad. I mean, you can be happy, but you can't be too happy.
Right?
You get excited,
then
but
you're also gay if you're too happy.
Right?
It's crazy.
It's wild, and yet it's still widely held. These things are not things that are like, maybe for most of us discussing them now, there's an awareness. But if you talk to a lot of folks, they still hold on to that. And it's not because they want to. It's because they've been caged in and taught that this is how it's supposed to be. And they don't question it because they have no other form or anyone else teaching them an alternative to a possibility. And so for me, that is the biggest thing is shame, right? Shame that we bring in. And that's for everybody, because we are all under the same system, under the same social constructs. So even women, even queer folks, the theys and thems, everyone, we are all still trained and conditioned in the dominant social cultural aspects of what it means to exist and be human, and especially our roles and approved expectations and non-approved. And it's draining.
Oh, for sure. We always talk about the fact that the patriarchy isn't just affecting men or women. The patriarchy affects everybody across the spectrum in some way.
It affects everyone. And like I even mentioned Marianismo, right? That's in Spanish, that's the opposite, right? The matriarchy. It is the same thing. It is rooted and embedded in unrealistic expectations that reinforce patriarchy, because they go hand in hand. So I tell people, it's not about femininity or masculinity, one being better than the other. It's literally about how these energies have been taught to almost be seen as polar opposites when they are meant to be collaborative, and even the and that's just because that's what we have the names for, right? Our brain, I think, really enjoys the binary, so it's simpler for us to understand.
Yes.
But if we just said, well, why can't we just be human? Why do we have to like think that this is appropriate or that's not appropriate in terms of how we want to show up, how we want to exist, how we want to express feelings, how we want to love others? It just becomes like such an obstacle. And I think that's what leads to so much of this lack of awareness and this like cage-in, right, that we put ourselves in, where we even limit the way we love others. I have men who come to me and tell me, my biggest problem with my wife is that I don't know how to express my feelings, and they can't, they're so upset about it, and they're like, I just never had to. I don't know how to do that. I don't know what they want. I don't know how to be emotional, and I see it, and I'm like, no, you do. You just have been taught to be ashamed of it, and it's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, what do you remember when you cried or when you told someone something, when you were being sensitive? Oh, don't do that. That's not what boys do. That's, that you're not gay. And I remember them being like, oh, like, wow. Like I didn't realize that, even little things like, and obviously it's way more complex and deeper, but even just the surface level stuff, it's a very important aspect of, like I said, being human that's not usually explored, which is why I also love sex therapy, because we go in there, you know, we're not like, people come in because that is one of the things that's holding them back. Even things like I mentioned earlier, erectile dysfunction for a lot of men, a lot of it is rooted in anxiety, depression, and also a lot of shame. Around performance, around misconceptions of what sex is supposed to feel like, or how they're supposed to look to have sex. So I mean, you know, it's there's a lot of layers to it. So that's why I love this work, because it's really human, you know, more so than anything, than a lot of other areas in therapy, right? They're very focused on the brain. This is like a body, mental, spiritual.
It affects everybody.
It checks all the boxes. It's the he's, the she's, and the theys. Everyone experiences sex at one point in their lives, unless you choose a life of celibacy, and even still, then you wrestle with this idea of intimacy and loving on someone else without that physical aspect. So there's lots to explore there. We definitely appreciate the conversation. I know part of what you wanted to share with us was the creative practices and how that's not spoken about too often, but I also want to give you space to talk about your styling, your packages, and all the things that you're promoting right now.
Yeah, you know, I think they're both kind of commingle with each other. I mean, creativity and mental health, you know, like I mentioned earlier, it was the path that I always knew I needed, that ability to express creativity, because it was such a pivotal part of my survival as a kid. I loved fashion. I loved looking at novelas. I loved looking at women like be dressed up, but it was always like, that's not for boys. Don't do that. Blah, 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 you know. And even when I would play with my cousins, like I remember they would bring their dolls and I would make dresses for them out of toilet paper, and they loved it. Be like, make my doll a dress. And I'd be like making them out of TP, you know, right there. Like making sure that the ruffles were good and all of that. And they loved it. And, you know, as soon as an adult came in, I would like toss it on the side and grab my Power Ranger, you know, because I knew even then that it was not meant to be for me. And so at an early age, I learned about survival. And so creativity for me has always saved me. It's always been this other part of me that's allowed me to dream bigger. So when I mentioned going into therapy, that was still very much my professional brain, that I knew I can do this academically. It was more in touch with my emotional side too, because it was allowing me to help others and to be someone that also accepted their humanness. But the creative part was something that took me a really long time to finally embrace and to say it's okay for me to be creative. And like I said, this all happened during the pandemic. You know, we were all just sitting there thinking, reflecting on life, you know, trying to figure out
how did we get here?
Puzzles, watercolors.
What's going to happen, you know, all of these things. And so I think that was one of those moments where it's like, well, you know, I have time. What's been going on for me? And I remember one of my therapists was asking me about my queerness, and I had started to identify as queer. And the reason why I started to identify as queer was because I remember identifying as gay for a really long time and never really feeling like I fit into the community. You know, a lot of the values that are still held in a lot of the gay community, and this isn't everyone, and I don't want to stereotype, but a lot of it is very rooted in masculine, patriarchal aspects as well. It's just a very different, rebranded form. And there's still a lot of bias and internalized homophobia in the gay community. And I remember always feeling like, well, I'm still the extra gay. I'm the feminine gay. You know, I'm the one that people make fun of or make comments about. And yet I'm the best dressed one. I'm the one that's coming in with, you know, and I thought I need a different identity, and queer was the one that I had heard about. And I had gotten so many mixed messages from older folks who were like, it's a slur, from younger folks who were like, it's political, to where I finally realized, I think in my readings, that queerness is really more of a philosophy than it is an identity. It's not like saying I'm gay and people are like, oh, you're attracted to men.
Right.
Queerness is broad. It's actually a philosophy that states that as humans, we exist in a very... what's the word, like unlimited kind of way, that we're not
unlimited. Sorry,
it's I know
it's the alphabet in the room.
I had to.
I know you're gonna get me singing it here. I was going through your Instagram page and I saw the post and I was like, oh, okay, I got to.
Oh, we had to do it. Oh my gosh,
we can fuck up some Wicked.
Oh my gosh, you know what? And we could even bring that in here because that's what Wicked was. Wicked was talking about queerness. It was talking about freedom of expression and liberation, and how people get labeled as evil when they're not like everyone else. You know, there's so much
thrust. It was thrust.
So I'm glad you brought that in there. Yeah, because it is unlimited. That's the thing about it, is that it's saying you don't have to exist like everyone else, which is also mind-boggling to me, that we as humans decided everyone has to fit in a uniform, and that's how we all exist. We're all going to do this, and that's what we agree on. And no one sat there and thought, well, what if someone doesn't see the world that way? What if someone actually wants to be a little spicy, and like dress up in a different color, or like, not have their hair the way that you're told, or maybe even just do a different type of job, like that's not money making and capitalistic, right? And that they're okay with that form of success. What about all of these other ways of living? And so for me, queerness was God sent, as they say. It was this almost like moment of like, I don't have to exist into a narrative. I am who I am, and I don't even know who I am all the time. Sometimes I sit there and I'm wondering, like, I used to see myself in this way, and then now I don't. And so I think what it's allowed me to do has been to be me and to see creativity as an extension and as a part of me. And I believe that all of us, whether you identify as queer or not, that it is a part of us being human, that we have all looked up at the sky and wondered, that we have all done these things where we question, that we have all been scared and all have been hopeful. I mean, all of these things, and all of that, to me, when you think of queerness, it's really this idea that we can exist in so many ways, and we're constantly changing, evolving, growing, developing, and that it's not fair for us to have to know these things like this at one point in our lives, because it doesn't work that way. And so that word and embracing it at that time was what really set me off, because I remember after that, everything moved fast. I accepted it, and then I thought, you know what? I've always wanted to play with makeup. I've always wanted to play with fashion, like beyond what I wear now. I started to, my partner was so supportive through the whole process. I remember he actually took me to the MAC store when I told him I wanted to play with makeup, and he was literally trying lipsticks on me, and we were going through what shade fits, and we'll be playful. We took like 10 lipsticks home, and he would help me put it on. He still applies my lipstick when we go to events. He's like, oh my hold on,
that's so precious.
And he's like, come on, let me put on your lipstick. And I'm like, thanks, babe. It was that, and I was so afraid, and I don't share this often, but I was so terrified, I think, at that point, because I was also worried that he was going to see me differently. That he was dating a man who was gay, that then realized that they don't feel like a man in that context. That I didn't feel like, I knew I wasn't trans. I knew that I felt like I was he all the time. And I realized through queerness, my gender queerness, right, that I also existed in energies that were not just stuck in one space. And that's not everybody. I always tell people, it doesn't mean that if that's not true for you, it's not true for you. But for me, I knew it. I felt it, and I knew that I loved my body, and I didn't have any challenges with it. But I also knew that I didn't like what I was told I was supposed to dress with, and I also knew that I was very feminine from the get-go. I walked differently, I talked differently, I made my eyes roll differently. I was just very different, and no one taught me that. That was something that I moved towards. And so, all of that, when I accepted it, everything moved so fast for me that I think that was when I was really angry. It was a very angry moment in my life, too. It was rage. And I'm actually going to have an interview with another therapist colleague that I just met for my podcast, Queer Magic. And we're talking about queer rage. Because I think a lot of people, a lot of people often think, the queers, we're like happy and spreading rainbows, but we're also angry. Right. Yes. We're also pissed because there's been so much of society that has pushed us down, and we've had to push back, and a lot of times in a very lonely space or a very scary space. And for me, when I think of queer rage, I was like, that's what that moment was. I was pissed. I was sitting there thinking, I've been told my whole life that I wasn't attractive enough to be a model. I wasn't enough to dress this way, that I can't wear makeup, that I can't do this, that I can't do that. And it was almost like that moment where my brain was just like, oh my God, like I can't live like this. I can't exist this way. That I started to do it. And I started to play with makeup. I started to go shopping for clothes that felt good to me. And I struggled because there wasn't a lot of clothes that was for the days. It was men's clothes or women's clothes. And a lot of it was me playing back and forth, having to extend certain parts because they just did not go for my body. And realizing over time that was one of the big obstacles for a lot of queer folks, right? Their way to express themselves has often had to rely on community and us finding one another, and also us creating our own paths because it's not there. And so for me, that was one of those moments too where my creativity started to really shine through, and it had sparked its way in so many different moments in my life. Like even when I started dating my partner, I remember I would make him shirts. And I don't know why I would make him shirts. It was just a thing that I liked. And I remember making him these big shoulder pads, and he would wear them too, which is the funniest thing that I didn't, he would actually wear them out. Right. And they were tacky. Now when I look back, I'm like, they're a little tacky, but they're cute. I made them. Right. Yes. But he loved it. And so, it showed up in little moments like that. And I think it was always shut down though. I was told like, no. And, then I started to see so many younger folks, and even through TikTok, through all these other places where they were doing their makeup, they were out and open. And I was this older, I like to call it a late bloomer queer, almost in my late 30s, my mid 30s, where I had just really realized like I have been surviving. And I don't want to keep surviving. I want to thrive. I make my own money now. I have my own career. I have a relationship. I'm doing all these things. I'm like, I need to like really sit down and think about this. And that's, like I said, sped through it. I had a lot of rage. I said, I'm going to start modeling. And I started reaching out, got a lot of no's, a lot of doors thrown in my face. People kind of like, oh, like giving the face when I said, oh, I model. I'd be like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, no, we only do like men's and women's, blah, 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 and getting those kinds of back and forth, and me saying crying days where I felt like crap, and other days where I was like, well, I'm going to do this on my own. And I found so many amazing people that saw me and were like, yes, Louise, we want to work with you. We want you to do, we want to collaborate with you. And 2 years later, last year I got paid to go model in San Francisco for the first time. I walked in like 3 different shows. I did so much that I never thought I was going to get to do. And it wasn't through the big brands. It wasn't through all of these people that I already knew in my head. They were the ones that told me I couldn't. It was through community. It was through the people that had vision and real creativity. It was through the people that were, also in the same place as me, like fighting the oppressive, stories and narratives and challenging it. And that was my last year. And I mean, it took time. And yet this year, I've been getting a lot of opportunities to speak about it, to do workshops on self-expression, to be myself. And I still get the no's, I still get the stares. But it's so funny because back then it hurt so much to get them because I was still healing and trying to figure myself out. Then now I feel so empowered through it and through the people that I know that sometimes I'm like, oh, they don't have imagination. It's fine. I'm moving on. And then I find people who do, and we make magic. So, I was
gonna say, like, how much more special is it to be able to express yourself in a group that fully and completely accepts you with open arms and doesn't have like a inkling of like, well, I mean, we'll try it, but I don't know. That's not a space you want to be in either. Yeah. So
because then you're not fully seen and accepted. So what's the point? People that love you and see you.
People that love you and see you. And I think for me, a big part of why I even have these interviews or do this work is because I know what it was like for me growing up and being told that I wasn't enough to be seen.
Right.
That when I see other queer people, I know what they're going through. I know what it's like to live in a world that's constantly telling you that you're not normal, that you don't belong. And yet I see the beauty that they bring into the world. And, for me, it took me such a long time to just appreciate it and to see it as a gift that I grew up remembering middle school where I would cry because I couldn't tell my parents that I was getting bullied because I was so scared of what they would say or think or try to do because they wanted to help me, that I remember crying and praying to God, because that was one thing I got taught was prayer. God, please make me normal. Please just let me wake up and be normal. Like I will be so grateful that I recall like last year for the first time feeling like, thank you, God, for making me queer. And just that transition alone was so powerful for me that it went from being this curse that I spent almost 35 years of my life hating to now loving it and being so grateful and thinking like, this is a blessing. I get to live my life in ways that lots of people didn't, even in the 80s, even before that. And so that's why when I do this work, I think a lot about that, because I want people to see me not as someone that they want to be like or to act like or dress like. I want them to see me and be like, wow, that bitch is, doing their own thing. I want to be like that too. I'm going to do my thing.
Yeah, I want to step into my queerness in the same way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So So
yeah, I definitely resonate with everything you're saying, because queer just feels way more inclusive. It feels way more colorful. I think that society likes boxes because it feels familiar. So it's like gay, like you said, you know, oh, it's a man who loves a man. A lesbian is a woman who loves a woman. Bisexual, even people like understand a little bit more. I feel like you get a little bit more questions, and there's like a lot of gray, I guess, with that. But I feel like queerness is it's just so fluid. It's so open, inviting. It just
welcoming. Feels like it's warm.
Yeah, I was gonna say it feels like a big blanket.
And you know, that you take ownership of your own story. It lets you figure out who you are on your own without telling you that you need to be this automatically by default. That's the beautiful part of it. And, you know, queerness is just, it's a philosophy, like I said. You know, it's not just an identity, because if I say someone is queer, that doesn't mean that you know what they are. You don't know who they're attracted to. You don't know how they express themselves. You don't know how they identify. It's just, you're just queer. I'm a rainbow of things. So to me, that's why it's so special that I see it in all of us. You know, queerness, it's funny because I often explain it in the sense that binaries do not allow for queerness to exist, because it's either this or that. But queerness allows for even binaries to exist, that you can be straight and be, you know, aligned with your gender. That's okay. That's fine. Because you can exist that way, but also you can exist in so many other ways. So it's just freeing for all of us, you know. And I think that's what I love about it, is that no one has to exist in any way that they don't want to, you know. And so it's in that way it's so special, you know. So
yeah.
Love that. Yeah, well, as
definitely.
3 chatterboxes, we could go on and on and on, I'm sure, forever and all of eternity. But we did want to give you some time to tell our listeners, our feelers, where they could find you across social media platforms, as well as where they could book your styling packages, which we will link everything in the show notes, but you guys have to go to the website and take a look at the styling packages. As soon as we saw them, we were like, please.
Yes, we were like,
I want.
Yeah, when we do another photo shoot for our podcast, we're like, we're hiring Luis.
We're making the drive.
Please let me know. We will make some magic. We'll make it, you know, beautiful. It's so interesting because the styling packages were something that I was going to launch this month, but everything that's happening, you know, it made more sense to postpone it. But it's still an offering that I'm really excited about, and I'm going to be sharing more details and also collaborating with more folks on, because that is the essence of it. I want people to come in and feel like they are beautiful. They don't have to look like they're on, you know, the the Louis Vuitton runway or any of that stuff. You can look however you want. You're beautiful. We're going to figure it out and we'll make it work. And I want people to feel comfortable, because I know that that's what I didn't get when I started doing this work and modeling, until I met the amazing people that are part of my life now. So I want others to feel that. So that's why I'm offering those. And, you know, people can find me on Instagram at Luis _ the THEE, like Megan Thee Stallion _ LMFT, and I know you'll link it so people can find me there. Absolutely. And then my main website is www.luis-cornejo.com, and that's where you can see my modeling portfolio, all my offerings, a lot of my walks that I've done for fashion shows, the podcast, which is Queer Magic. I started that a couple years ago. It's finally coming back this year after its first season. So getting all those ducks in a row. Last year I spent growing my modeling portfolio and just the creative side, and this year I'm bringing back my Queer Magic, so that's also on there if people want to listen to the first season. And I think that's it. The only other website is my therapy website, so I do offer fully virtual services in California, all over California. So if anyone's interested in therapy, they can definitely look into my services, and that's www.PsychoSocialTherapy.com. And then you can see my rates and like the work that I do, what I specialize in, and learn a little bit more about me. And I've gone fully virtual because it accommodates people's schedules, and you can see me from anywhere in California on a computer. And check that out. Those are my main socials.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Definitely check him out. We've loved following you and just seeing the different content that you post. I'm like, yes, go off. So if you ever, if there's ever somebody just like shouting at you in the comments and with a bunch of emojis, that's me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. No, it's welcomed. I love it, and I appreciate you both for just holding space and also for inviting me and letting me be the first in a lot. I know we were chatting about this before. I felt special.
Yeah. We're so excited. So thank you so much for spending time with us. I know we went over a little bit, so we want to respect your time, but we just absolutely loved hearing your story. So thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay, y'all. That was such a fun and exciting conversation to be a part of with Luis. Like we said earlier, we do appreciate so much that they felt comfortable in sharing their story with us, and so eloquently. Like, I just never felt like that. I was always wanting to know, and then what, and then what, and then what, because it's such a fascinating journey from his adolescence through his adulthood and even now, and you know, them being comfortable in their own skin and deciding that you know, queerness was a better indicator for how they felt on the inside,
you know, and blossoming into their queerness.
And what really touched me was, you know, Luis's partner being on board. You know, for your partner to just be like, girl, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, well, I love you for you. Like, your identity is important to you, and that's why it's important to me. But however you fit in, you know, I'm here. And so I just think it was like the sweetest thing ever. And we're so appreciative of them sharing their multi-potentiality with us and being able to share their experience in becoming a therapist and what their experience was like even in academia and moving back and forth, north, south, until, you know, they really figured it out and found a home in themselves and physically.
That's really what I took away from it the most, is that I think that it's great if you know who you are from a young age and you're able and safe to express that from a young age. But that's not the case for everybody. And there shouldn't be this shame or this stigma in the queer community that if you are not 100% out and proud by a certain age, or, you know, you are still learning different parts of yourself, that doesn't mean that you're not proud or that you don't have pride. And it's like, well, I learn new things about myself all of the time, and the way that I want to express myself and the way that I love. So it's like, why do we have to like be on a time limit or on this, you know, kind of like we always say, there's no time frame that you need to figure that out.
No one's going to be at your front door when you're 35 and a half years old. Like, hello, you know, how are you identifying? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's ever evolving and it's always changing. And so this idea that we have to reach or attain this identity, or like, it's almost like are you comfortable yet? Okay, well, tell us. And it's just for you. You know, we appreciate Luis for sharing, of course. And that's why I love that it was like, it doesn't matter really what age you're at. And in 5 years, it could change.
And it was cool to see that they were having realizations, and, you know, different things were kind of like clicking or aligning into place in their head as they told the story. You could tell that they really walked us through every, you know, high and low point. And then at the end, they're like, oh, well, like, yeah, I didn't really realize till that I finished telling this that, you know, that was my experience, or that I did so many things. I've tried so many new things. Like, I just love somebody who's just down to try shit. And how they said, like, all of the different experiences in their life and the different things that they learn and places they've been has been able to bring them the opportunities or help them express themselves in different ways. So like they talked about with, you know, walking in the fashion show and having the fashion doing the styling on top of mental health. It's like, you don't have to just do one thing, another multi-potentialite, you know? It's like you can express multiple things about your interests that you like. It doesn't have to just be like, oh, I'm a therapist, so that's all I can do. It's like, no, if you want to start styling people, or you want to start, I don't know, racing cars, whatever you want to do, you can do it. It doesn't have to be, you're not so one-dimensional.
Right. And I think that a lot of people project their own personal insecurities onto someone else, like Luis, who is so fully themselves and totally unapologetic about stepping into something that's brand new and really going at it like, you know, guns blazing. Right. Like, I'm down to try this, and I'm gonna really do it, and I'm gonna put my full effort into it because I know it's gonna bring me joy, and I know it's gonna help me tap into, in their case, my creative side, and that's gonna help with my mental health and all these other things that we know to be true, right? So yeah, we'll kind of leave you guys to digest it on your own. Yeah. I know it's such a beautiful story to share with us, with you all. So please share your favorite moment or share your favorite part of Luisa's story in the Spotify comments, YouTube comments, or hit us up on our Instagram.
Yeah. And that's pretty much all that we have for you. Just a reminder, there isn't an episode next week because this is the official start of us going to the every other week format. So no episode next week. You can maybe catch up on a past episode that you haven't listened to before, but we will be back the following Wednesday.
Absolutely. You don't have to miss us too long. You know, it's just enough. It's just enough to miss us. Yeah. And I'm sure there's an episode you haven't listened to yet.
Exactly. Click on it. And even if you have listened to them all, you can engage with us on socials. Yeah. Or something. I don't know.
We're always posting to stories. We're always posting little memes to stories. Here recently, I posted the Timothy Chalamet one about like eldest daughters trying not to snap back at somebody or clap back at somebody rather. And I was just like, Timothy, my fellow Capricorn man. I'm like, I get it.
Don't get me started.
I'm like, I get it, Timothy.
Don't get me started. I get it.
You guys,
he's the youngest recipient of the Screen Actors Guild Award
ever.
This was like this past weekend. I don't remember what day. Ooh, I want to say he's like in his mid-20s.
Yeah, like, I was like, he's not that young.
I mean, I think he's young, but you know what I mean. Yeah, I think that he's like probably around Kylie's age, so maybe like 25, 26, 27 max.
They're so little. Yeah. Yes. We love you guys. We will see you not next week, but we will see you next time on the Green Velvet Couch.
Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you.
Have a nap.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this week's EA meeting.
If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend and leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple or Spotify. We'd love to hear from you.
You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Empaths and On Pod.
Don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts or subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on the notification bell so you're the first to know when we release a new episode.
We'll meet you back here on the Green Velvet Couch next time.
Bye, feelers!